Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that diversity in our courts is a very important factor, and we see once again a very diverse group of nominees, and I thank President Biden for that, because experiential background, racial diversity, I think, is very much needed on our courts. To ensure the fitness to serve of all of the nominees, I ask the following two initial questions of all nominees who come before any of the committees on which I sit. So I'll start with asking these two questions of each of you, and we'll just go right down the line, starting with Judge Belkin-Green. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors?
No.
Or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, I have not.
No, Senator, I have not.
No, Senator, I have not.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Second question, have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, I have not.
No, I have not.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
I would also like to note that the so-called doctrine of originalism is certainly not anything that I would request of any of our judicial nominees. My assumption is that, and what I look for in our nominees is an ability to be fair and objective, and as district court judges, that you will apply the precedent of the Supreme Court. I'll start with a question for Judge Kirsch. You have participated in several panels on prison reentry, and I think you focus on juveniles. I think that's a really important aspect of the criminal justice system, that the reentry of our prisoners into our communities. And I understand that, as you noted, you also initiated a statewide juvenile reentry program. The Board of Prisons ran a halfway house, which closed in 2019 in Hawaii, and I've been trying to reopen this federal halfway house to enable prisoners leaving our federal prisons some ability to re-enter in a more successful way. How important do you think it is for halfway houses to exist within our prison system?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Senator. I think halfway houses in any aspect to seg an individual from a custodial location and reintegrate them into society is critical and may be dispositive in terms of one's success. And obviously, it's a policy-making decision on how to allocate resources. But in my experience, fronting money up front might save an awful lot of recidivism down the road and help reintegrate folks back into their families and their communities to be productive individuals. So I think it's critically important.
Do any of the other nominees have any experience or have any thoughts about the importance of a reentry program? Anybody else want to add to what the judge just noted? Okay. For Mr. Farbias, yes, like the chairman, I note that you come from a background where your parents were immigrants and who truly came here with nothing. Can you just talk a little bit more about how much that experience really informed your life or career choices?
Senator, thank you for that question. I was privileged to grow up in a house where all four of my grandparents were alive and had grown up speaking different languages than English. I grew up in a household where my grandparents, there were four of them, three of them didn't know how to drive a car, and one was a New York City taxi driver. It was a wonderful and exciting place to be a child. And what I would say is, I remember that, and I carry it with me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if I could itemize all the different ways it's influenced my life, but it's part of what's driven me to public service.
I think that kind of a life experience really informs you what you want to do with your life, and I certainly can relate to that because I grew up here with English is not my first language, So I want to thank all of the panelists and nominees, because I think you will all make very excellent judges. Congratulations to each of you. Aloha.
In the nick of time.
Thank you. Oh, everybody. You've heard all of us say we pay our bills. What is so hard to understand about how all of us need to pay our bills? That is why we keep saying, when we raise the debt ceiling, we are paying our bills. And we did this in a bipartisan way, even during the Trump years, which, by the way, the Trump administration added to the debt with the massive tax breaks that they gave to the richest people and corporations in our country. But now we have a bunch of MAGA Republicans in the House who have decided that they should fool around with the idea of paying our debts because they have an agenda. And what is their agenda? Their agenda is to cut government services, but they don't tell us what they want to slash. Do they want to slash Medicare, Social Security, programs that we all have been paying into for all of our working lives? They don't tell us that. But they think it's okay to hold our government hostage over whether or not we are going to pay our bills. Enough of this nonsense. Enough of this games playing. It's time for us to take responsibility, which, even during the Trump years, the Republicans managed to do, but suddenly it's all up in the air. Stop this nonsense. Pay our bills. Don't hold our country hostage.
Thank you, Maze. Questions? Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank all of the panelists and everyone in the audience and those who are watching these proceedings. What I get, of course, is the utter frustration that you all are sharing with us. And of course, I thank my colleague for her advocacy and getting something done. Dr. Pristine, there is a definition for addiction, and would you say that the millions of young people who are on social media, that they are exhibiting what amounts to an addiction to these platforms?
Within the science community, we're debating over the use of that word a little bit right now to depict social media, but I do think there's agreement that there is clearly a dependency on social media, which we can see in kids suffering from many of the same symptoms that we see in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Addiction to Substances. It seems to apply quite well to the description of kids' behavior and dependency on social media.
And the additional danger to an addiction to social media is that this is such a negative kind of information that they can get. They're bullied, they're hassled, there are all kinds of horribly negative kinds of messages that they get from this particular addiction, which may be, a little bit different. So we do have treatments normally for addiction. Do we have treatments for addiction to social media?
I don't believe those have been adequately studied.
And we probably should study it. And that gets me to Ms. Lemke. You started on social media at a sixth grade, was it? Would you say that you were addicted to social media?
I will say that I exhibited, and thank you for your question, Senator, a dependency that was stated here today, but I do not think that I alone can define what that addiction means. I think that other members of my generation and other young voices should be integrated into these ongoing conversations into what constitutes an addiction moving forward.
Well, did you have a hard time not going to social media on a regular basis, on a daily basis? You spent up to 6 hours on these
Absolutely.
platforms? So regardless of what the medical definition might be, that when you're spending 6 hours on a platform that didn't make you feel terribly good about yourself, so how was it that you finally broke yourself of this dependency?
Well, thank you, Senator, for your question. It took getting to a breaking point where my anxiety was so great, my depression was incredibly acute, and my issues with disordered eating were rampant. It took about 3 to 4 years getting into the 9th grade where one day I heard the buzz of a notification and I had the Pavlovian response to instantly grab for it. And suddenly in that moment, I asked why. Why was I allowing these companies to have so much control over me? And that question has led to many more and has gotten me here today to speak up about the importance of having youth voices at the legislative table.
So I appreciate your mentioning that. It sounds, but your sort of the light going off in your head, is that the kind of experience that a lot of young people who are so dependent on these platforms that they can, on their own, will decide, I just can't take this anymore? Or is that one of the reasons that you created Log Off? Can you tell us a little bit more about what your program or the movement does to help young people?
Yes, Senator, thank you. I think each young person who struggles with this issue comes at it from a very different angle. For me, it took reaching that breaking point. For others, they continue to be harmed. And that was the reason I created Log Off. It was to seek out other young people who were frustrated, who were struggling, who were angry, and wanted to talk to each other across our generation, members who understand the experience better than any other group of people across this world. So I created that body in order to have those conversations and to work collectively to move forward in building effective solutions and in discussing those complexities in the online world and living through a digital childhood.
Thank you very much for your stepping up. I only have a little bit of time. I want to get to Ms. Bride. There's been a lot of discussion about Section 230. A number of us have bills to reform Section 230, as do I. I think one of the concerns, though, is that the wholesale elimination of Section 230, which I do support, holding these platforms responsible for the kind of hugely harmful content, but it does get into First Amendment freedom of speech issues. So we need to be very aware that as we reform Section 230 to enable, I would say, lawsuits like yours to proceed, that we do it in a careful way to avoid unintended consequences. But I want to share with you our deepest sympathies for what you continue to endure, and the rest of you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee.
Chairman, Mr. Attorney General, aloha.
Aloha.
As I've sat listening to some of the questions, the phrase badgering the witness comes to mind, but I commend you for the calm way that you have comported yourself at this hearing. You have been accused of selective prosecution around the abortion issues. I want to note that since 1977, anti-choice extremists have been responsible for 11 murders, 26 attempted murders, 42 bombings, 194 arsons, and thousands of other criminal incidents by anti-choice extremists. And of course, we should prosecute all violence and threats of violence by those on both sides of the abortion issue, but isn't it the case that our prosecutorial focus should be on the most violent acts?
Well,
Attorney General?
Look, we prosecute without respect to ideology, but we do focus on the most violent acts, the most dangerous actors, the cases that are most likely to lead to danger to Americans. But we don't care what the ideology of the person who is threatening that act or who is taking that act. We will prosecute regardless.
That is what I would expect of any Attorney General who observes the rule of law and who abides by it, regardless of whatever the religion, all of that. So that is what I expect from the Attorney General. In the wake of the Supreme Court's, in my view, disastrous ruling in Dobbs, because that ruling has led to fear and chaos all across the country. And abortion is now a crime in over a dozen states, but it is not a federal crime. What affirmative steps is the department taking to ensure that states are not infringing women's constitutional right to travel across state lines for whatever purpose?
We do not see anything in the Dobbs case to suggest in any way that states can interfere with travel between states. In fact, at least one of the justices made clear that that was not within the scope of Dobbs, and so we are looking closely. I'm not familiar with any state that has tried to criminalize interstate travel. But if there were, we would make the appropriate filings. We have supported the Veterans Department and the Department of Defense in their policy decisions to support people to travel out of state to receive the necessary reproductive care.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, there are people who are trying to make it ever harder for persons who get pregnant in this country to be able to access abortion services and other reproductive services. In fact, we are awaiting a decision by a federal judge in Texas whether or not he should impose a national injunction on the use of mifepristone, which is the drug that is most often used for early stage abortion. It's also a drug that is used to treat miscarriages in the early stages. So you have a federal judge that is about to impose this kind of an injunction. It would affect every state in the country, including all those states like Hawaii, which was among the first to decriminalize abortion. So I would say that the efforts do not stop there. So whatever you can do to make sure that women in this country know that they can travel to other states to get whatever services that they seek. The department awards billions of dollars in grants to state, local, and tribal law enforcement each year. The department also operates joint task forces and provides access to forensic and surveillance resources. This sort of collaboration can be good when put to good use fighting criminals who prey on our communities, but these resources could also be used against women seeking reproductive care. I've just sent a letter to the president expressing my concerns about the use of these federal funds by local law enforcement to basically hunt down women who are seeking abortion. So how is the department working to ensure that states and local partners do not use federal resources to enforce state laws restricting women's access to reproductive care?
On your first question, just to be clear, we have filed in support of the FDA and the mifepristone lawsuit that you're talking about. We are hopeful that the result will not be the one that you're concerned that you described.
Well, there was judge shopping to make sure that it's this particular Texas judge who would get this case.
We have filed the appropriate briefs in that.
Thank you.
On the second question, I personally haven't looked into it. I don't know the answer to that. So if we could have some people in the department get back to your staff on that, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. With a perspective that these kinds of federal resources should not be used by states to go after women who are seeking reproductive services. I hope that is the perspective that you bring to the issue. I want to get to the issue of domestic terrorism and white supremacy. Last fall, our colleagues on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee released a report on the federal response to domestic terrorism. In it, they noted that, I quote, national security agents now identify domestic terrorism as the most persistent and lethal terrorist threat to the homeland, end quote. They also explained that, quote, this increase in domestic terror attacks have been predominantly perpetuated by white supremacists and anti-government extremist individuals and groups, end quote. This fits with a recent Department of Homeland Security assessment that the country, quote, remains in a heightened threat environment, end quote, and that some of the potential targets include, quote, faith-based institutions, the LGBTQ community, schools, and racial and religious minorities. Do you agree that white supremacist terrorists pose a significant threat to our country, and especially to racial and religious minorities and the LGBTQ plus community?
Yes, as the FBI reported in that report you're talking about, racially motivated violent extremists as a group are the most dangerous of the domestic violent extremist groups, and within that, the white supremacists are the most dangerous and most lethal. Yes.
So what more can the department do to combat this rise in these kinds of domestic terrorist activities?
We've allocated a significant amount of resources for this purpose. The National Security Division has stood up a domestic violent extremist unit to further track and try and interdict these actions. The FBI is treating this with enormous seriousness of purpose, and we are going to do everything we can to deter and prosecute.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Kennedy?
Is made available to the committee. Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Syed, it is very good to see you. And do you have family members here today?
I do. My wife and my son are right behind
Where are
me.
you? Very good. Thank you so much, because as far as I'm concerned, you should have been confirmed a long time ago. And I'm glad that we now have this opportunity to do the right thing, because it is really crazy that at a time when small businesses are in need of the support of the SBA, that this position has been vacant for many years. And you are very, very highly qualified, to say the least, to take this position and to move the SBA. I'm really glad also that the SBA administrator, Isabel Guzman, did come to Hawaii. She spent an entire day meeting with our small businesses and to be introduced to the entrepreneurs who really helped to move Hawaii's economy along. You are an immigrant.
I am.
Right. So you're also an entrepreneur. You wanted to, you started your own business. What was it, was part of the impetus for wanting to start your own business and be an entrepreneur, part of your immigrant experience? Can you talk a little bit about what motivated you?
That's a great question, Senator Hirono. Immigrants have a drive. They're on the outside, and they're always looking to see how they can go forward. And clearly, having that that energy that I gotta make the most of this incredible opportunity to make America home plays a big role. I'll say, Senator, my story is only possible in the United States of America. I was born in Pakistan. I came here as an international student to College of Worcester in rural Ohio, so very close to that part of the state. And here I am sitting in this room with incredible leaders for this opportunity. But clearly, the path to entrepreneurship is tied to immigration. If you look at the San Francisco Bay Area, which is home to our innovation, and now we're obviously spreading it around the country, almost half of all founders who have founded a startup were born outside the United States. And again, you can see this in all businesses of type, whether it's in Iowa or it's in North Carolina, that immigrants play a big role. So I'm proud of my immigrant roots. That has been an extra sort of push for me. But at the end of the day, it's also been about solving a business problem, right? Creating jobs, supporting the communities that we serve. And I've had a civic track from the very early days, including when I was in business school. So yes, it has played a role, but it's also been about solving business problems.
Well, you have hands-on experience in doing that, and I completely agree with you that immigrants who come to this country, and I know you know that I'm one too, that you have a deep appreciation for the opportunities that this country affords, opportunities that would not have been available had we not come to this country with usually very little. I don't know about you, but I think you come from humble beginnings, as do I, but it is a major imperative to give back to a country that provided opportunities that we would not have had otherwise. So I have no doubt that you have a commitment to the SBA, and the fact that you stuck it out for the last 2 years as you were prevented from being confirmed is also a testament to your commitment. The last time you were here, we did have a chat about how important it is to reach out to minority businesses. In Hawaii, that would be the Native Hawaiian businesses. And at that time, I asked you whether you would be committed to work with me to support the various programs for Native Hawaiians. And I would say to the indigenous small businesses throughout the country, though, but Alaska Natives and American Indian business people. Will you have that commitment?
Absolutely, Senator, I will.
Thank you. There are, the SBA Office of the Inspector General, OIG, published its annual report focused on the top management and performance challenges facing the SBA. Many of those challenges would require the attention of the deputy administrator, who is responsible for the day-to-day management of the agency. And yet, with that kind of an important responsibility, this position was left open for 5 years. Can you speak to how you would work to address these management challenges as deputy administrator? Very briefly, because my time is running out.
So, Senator, I'm an operator. I come to this job, if I'm so lucky to be confirmed, from the business experience of building organizations, running organizations. First, like I always do when I start a new job, you want to evaluate what the current state is. So I'll spend some time understanding what are some of those operating challenges that we need to overcome, and then work with the administrator to address them. This is an agency that is, in the front line of supporting our small businesses. It is the most critical time as we are still, undergoing this recovery. And so we need to make sure that we build the capacity, the muscle, the processes, our systems, use technology where it's appropriate, enhance things to make sure that we have the back of our small businesses. So I'm looking forward to doing that if I'm confirmed, and leverage all my operating experience as a businessman and bring that to the agency. And as you mentioned, this role hasn't been filled. In fact, my understanding is for most of 14 years hasn't been filled. And I work at the State Department. We have, I see the incredible support we get from our deputies. So there's a lot of thoughts I have. I'm going to reserve that judgment until I actually get in the job. But absolutely, my focus will be to make sure we build the capacity of the organization. When we talk about modernizing, there's an opportunity for us to learn some lessons during the pandemic and see what we can improve as we move forward.
Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator.
Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rice. Senator Budd.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have heard that every other federal judge, members of Congress, and legislative and executive branch employees are all bound by strict ethical rules. But this extends beyond government into the private sector, where employees from the CEO to the sales floor are subject to strict codes of conduct. For example, Home Depot tells all its employees that a conflict occurs when their private interests even appear to interfere with the company's interests, and that the perception of a conflict by others can be just as damaging. Home Depot makes clear that gifts of personal travel for an associate or an associate's family member are never allowed. Ally Bank explains that even gifts from personal friends can appear to be improper if the friendship resulted from a business relationship involving the bank, or the perceived purpose relates to business involving the bank. The bank tells its employees to ask themselves the following questions in evaluating gifts. Does the person or entity frequently provide or offer gifts to me? Is the gift extravagant or otherwise not reasonable and customary? Would I be embarrassed for everyone to know about the gift? Similarly, AutoZone tells all its employees we don't give or accept gifts, meals, entertainment, favors, or anything else of value that may inappropriately influence or appear to influence our judgment. So as we've seen today, the Supreme Court's ethics rules fall far short of the clear binding rules of the executive and legislative branches and those of the private sector. Judge Fogel, these companies have their rules posted online for the world to see. Wouldn't it help restore faith in the Supreme Court if it too had a set of explicit binding ethical rules available for the world to see?
Yes, I completely agree, Senator. I think it would. In the Code of Conduct for United States judges, which all the other federal judges follow, is online. You can find it anytime you want. All of the state courts have something similar that's available online. And I think it's potentially very reassuring to the public, particularly given all of the political back and forth. So yes, I think the answer is yes.
Thank you. Professor Frost, the Supreme Court has a huge impact on the daily lives of every single American. For example, the ruling in Dobbs that overturned Roe has led to chaos in our country over reproductive care. The decision gutting the Voting Rights Act have resulted in over a dozen states enacting laws making it harder and harder to vote. Supreme Court decisions have also sanctioned unlimited corporate spending in elections and diminished the quality of the air we breathe. Professor Frost, shouldn't a group of individuals with such immense power be held to at least the same ethical rules as all other judges?
Yes, I agree.
I want to get to the personal hospitality. That was a huge, I'd say, exception to the disclosure requirements. Before the Judicial Conference, at Senator Whitehouse's prompting, clarified the personal hospitality exception. The judiciary's rules were anemic at best. If there is even an argument, however unconvincing, that trips valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars might be allowed, it shows how far we are from a strong, binding code of ethics. And that is what the Supreme Court needs. And if the court will not adopt one on its own, we must impose one on them. And basically, for all of our panelists, I mean, the highest court in our land should hold itself to the highest ethical standards. And it is so clear that that is not what is happening today. What is so hard for our Supreme Court to adopt a code of ethics? It could have done so 11 years ago, 10 years ago, when our Chairman Frost first brought up the subject. So what is so hard for them to adopt a code that every other court has to abide by? You see, that's what we're facing today. And frankly, I can see why the public has severe questions about the confidence that they have in our Supreme Court, which seems to hold itself above any other court and any of the rest of us in terms of their ethical behavior. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
But I thank the chairman for giving me the extra time.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to acknowledge the fact that President Biden has nominated some of the most diverse nominees, highly qualified nominees to all of our courts, and diversity and inclusion is really critical. And I see, at least in two of our nominees this morning, that they are not far from the immigrant experience, which I think is a very critical part of inclusion and diversity on our courts. And again, as the only immigrant serving in the U.S. Senate, I think I have many life experiences that are common to our two nominees. And to all of our nominees, thank you very much for your willingness to continue public service. I'd say that when we ask questions such as the import of Plessy, Dred Scott, Korematsu, these are decisions that are fine examples of how the Supreme Court gets it really, really wrong. And I would say some of the court's decisions now will fit into that category, and it may not take that long for history to make that judgment. I asked the following two initial questions to ascertain the fitness to serve of every nominee who comes before any of my committees that I sit on. So I will ask each of you those two questions, and we'll start with Judge Ali Khan. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Judge Oliver, I really appreciate the fact that you talk with students about citizenship. I think that is something that we, all of us, should be focusing on, especially, and talking about, especially as I believe that the ability for people to vote, which is a basic and fundamental right of citizenship and responsibility, I believe there are too many states that are really limiting our right to vote. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to our young people and encourage them to be aware of public service. So in your responsibility committee on judicial ethics, why are judicial ethics and judicial integrity important to our justice system?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the short answer is when the people are aware that the judges whom they come before are governed by a rule of ethics, they have more faith that the judges police themselves, and that when there's a situation where a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, that judge would step aside. So it restores and continues, bless you, Senator, restores and continues faith in the criminal justice system by the litigants who come before us.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. Judge Ali Khan, you have spent thousands of hours on pro bono work. Can you just tell us why the pro bono work has been so important to you?
Thank you, Senator. There are so many litigants in this country that don't have the benefit of representation. Obviously, we have enshrined a right to counsel in criminal cases, but there are many civil cases, collateral proceedings, where there's not a constitutional or statutory right to counsel. And I think as lawyers, we owe an ethical duty to our legal community to represent those that cannot afford representation, both because it, I think, helps advance the interests of those individual litigants, but it also serves the court. I have been fortunate to be appointed by both the Third Circuit and the Sixth Circuit to handle cases where they felt that the use of counsel would be helpful.
Thank you. Judge DeClercq, the fact that you have a very unique background, to say the least, has being an immigrant been one of the reasons that you wanted to become a lawyer? And does it inform the, how you approach decision-making as a judge?
Yes, I'm very proud of being an immigrant. It is a more unusual immigrant experience in that I was brought to the United States as an infant and adopted by my family. But I've always been very aware of how different my life would have been had that not happened, and the incredible opportunities that this country has given to me. And so I've spent most of my professional career in public service. I deeply appreciate not only the country, but the government, which was why I joined the Department of Justice. And for me, it's always been about equality and justice, and I think that that is part of the immigrant experience.
Yes. I think you are another example of immigrants coming to this country to create a better life, but the appreciation we have for a country that afforded us opportunities we never would have otherwise had. I just want to mention, Mr. Chairman, for Judge Munley, it must be an incredibly meaningful experience for you to be sitting here to be on the court that your father served.
Thank you, Senator. It truly is an honor. He taught me about what it is to be a good judge. He served as such an example to me of what it means about judicial temperament, and I consider that one of the most important attributes for a judge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. And thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I share your concerns about the regarding U.S. person queries without warrants and the concerns expressed by a number of my other colleagues. So this is one of the reasons that I have not been able to vote for reauthorizing 702. And when I'm thinking about a warrant in this context, I am thinking about something much less involved than a typical FISC order, and much more like the search warrants that are issued in countless courthouses in our country every day. Last year, federal magistrate judges considered over 140,000 search warrants. Probable cause is not a high bar, and magistrate judges are used to evaluating it. Different provisions of FISA already allow federal magistrate judges to issue certain FISA orders, and I would support a discussion about expanding that authority to this context. For Mr. Olson, so you've had a chance to, we have met to talk about why can't we have a warrant requirement. The department opposes a warrant requirement because you argue that many of the queries are done before the FBI has probable cause, which says to me that if you had to meet a probable cause requirement, that would already decrease the number of applications. So do you have any reaction to the idea of using federal magistrate judges in a warrant requirement process?
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and your staff and to discuss these important issues. The warrant requirement that has been discussed when it comes to Section 702, I think is not workable and not legally required, and let me explain why. First, every judge that's looked at this issue, every federal judge, including judges on the FISA court, have concluded that a warrant is not required under the Fourth Amendment for searching the lawfully collected data that is in the FBI holdings. So there's no legal requirement, but putting that aside, because there are indeed privacy and civil liberties implications to the FBI searching with the U.S. person identifier. The fundamental problem is that such an approach would be unworkable, and I go back to the hypothetical that Senator Graham described, which is assume the military, our military obtains a cell phone in Syria, and that cell phone has 100 phone numbers on it. 30 of them are U.S. phone numbers, and the person that they get it from is a suspected ISIS member who's plotting against the United States. There may not be, in fact, likely wouldn't be probable cause to search those phone numbers in the FBI database. But with time being of the essence, it's absolutely critical that the FBI, along with other components within the intelligence community, take those phone numbers and determine whether or not we have an ISIS operator inside the United States who's plotting an attack. So we would not have probable cause. We wouldn't be able to take that step. It's not legally required. And if we were required, the sheer number of such requests would simply overwhelm the system. There's no number of FISA court judges or even magistrates who would have clearances, for example, who could possibly manage the number of queries. So it's both not legally required and it's not workable, and it wouldn't protect us.
You mentioned that all of the courts that have addressed the issue of Fourth Amendment issues, that they have all found that Section 702 does not require such warrants, but I have information that that is actually not the case. I don't know what specific questions were before particular courts, but several judges, including a unanimous panel of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, have raised constitutional concerns. And you note that you would want a U.S. person inquiry in the instance where there is a definite connection with a terrorist, for example, but how do you justify the querying of American protesters, for example, or people who have made contributions? I think that the 702 is way too broad. It does raise constitutional questions, and I'm just searching for some way that is not going to stop the legitimate reasons for why we need 702, but also to address the constitutional questions. And it occurs to me that maybe having magistrate judges who are very used to determining probable cause can be utilized in this regard, so that we don't have the situation of protesters' information being accessed or political contributors that has no connection to terrorists, for example. So, I am hopeful that we can figure out a way to find some way. I think I heard you say that you're okay with some reforms, and I know that the FBI recently put in a new procedure called, where you record the justification for all U.S. person queries. I would be interested to know what kind of recordation is it, and who determines whether justification was there. So perhaps you can give me a little bit of enlightenment as to what this record the justification is.
Yes, Senator.
Chair Abate?
Yes, within our system, the automated system, when the FBI employee who's seeking to do the query, the written justification has to be input into the system, and it's retained there in the records and recoverable forever with respect to that query. And we're making the system adaptations right now to fully put that into place, ensure that those records are retained and that they're reviewable and auditable.
My time is up, but I would have a concern as to whether there is any kind of a third-party, independent third-party person who reviews whether there was justification. Thank you,
If I
Mr.
may,
Chief.
just very briefly, Senator, that's in fact what the lawyers in the National Security Division do. The lawyers who work for me do exactly those audits of the FBI queries. About half the field offices each year, we review all of the queries that were done, and we review those justifications, those written justifications, to ensure that they meet the legal standard for searching the data. So again, I appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you further on this.
Senator Kennedy is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my...
Scott, Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To ensure the fitness of all of the nominees who come before any of the committees, I ask the following two foundational questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, ma'am.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, ma'am.
Congratulations, General, on your nomination. And of course, I join my colleagues in thanking General Berger for his years of outstanding service and leadership. I want to ask you about, well, I also join my colleagues in expressing our support for 31 amphib ships for you. And we do need to get to why, after everyone agrees that this is a good idea. And Senator Sullivan there led the charge in the latest effort to focus our attention on that need for 31 amphibs. So we will continue to pursue that in terms of your readiness. The transition of Marines off Okinawa and to more dispersed locations, including to Hawaii, we already have some of our Marines in Hawaii, but has been ongoing for a long time. And to basically move people our Marines out of Futema, and I don't quite know how we are proceeding with building up in Henoko, but I hope that is proceeding after such a long time. So meantime, our alliance with Japan has gotten stronger, and a new Marine Littoral Regiment, like the one already in Hawaii, will be stood up in Okinawa. General, how have the posture changes planned under the Defense Policy Review Initiative made the Marine Corps stronger in the Pacific?
Thank you, ma'am. That DPRI, as it's known, the relocation, ensures that we have strategic depth across the Pacific, from Japan, specifically the southern Ryukyus, and then, of course, Iwakuni in the home islands, down through Guam and back to Hawaii. That gives us some depth and reach across the first island chain. And that 12th Marine Littoral Regiment that you described, that was a very significant move. We're very grateful for our own State Department and the government of Japan for allowing that to stay when it was designed to go somewhere else. That is very significant, and I think it speaks to the need for those kind of rapidly deployable long-range fires units.
So the ability for the Marine Corps to do its mission in the Pacific, in my view, is predicated on something as basic as a strong infrastructure at our major installations like those in Hawaii and Guam, as well as smaller dispersed locations throughout the region. Yet, as you have testified previously, our infrastructure is not where it needs to be. If confirmed, how will you prioritize the foundational elements of readiness like water and electricity at our installations?
Senator, if confirmed, a priority and a deep priority is that infrastructure. Those bases and stations are power projection platforms in a modern fight. They're not simply bases where we live. It's a power projection platform, and the power they're projecting is the people who live on them and their families. They must be cared for and retained. And you only do that through quality housing. You do that through child development centers. You do that through water treatment facilities. I'm committed to those if confirmed.
Well, the thing is that those are priorities that have been articulated, and yet when we look at the requests, those priorities are not particularly reflected. So one of the areas that I'm very much focusing on in the Readiness Subcommittee is our infrastructure, and I will look to you for articulation and actual funding that will be reflected, because we can't have our water pipes leaking and electricity going off in our major hospitals in the Pacific, all of that. And I'm sure you two are familiar with what's going on at Red Hill and the need for billions of dollars to safely remove the 100 million gallons of fuel that is there. So I'm really looking for a plan, particularly for the Indo-Pacific AOR, that will reflect a commitment to strong infrastructure and not constantly wait until things break down for us to pay attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Persons who are testifying today. For Ms. Robinson, do you know what percentage of women's sports consists of transgender participants?
It is a very small number. I can say that that the Williams Institute has estimated about 300,000 trans youth total in the United States. That's less than a percentage of a percent. And when some of these laws pass in places like Utah, they are putting into place broad sports bans that ban kids from playing as early as the age of 5 years old. In Utah specifically, when the governor explored more about that piece of legislation, he last year called it cruel because it actually only impacted 4 trans students in the state and only 1 trans girl. So we know that there's a very small percentage of trans women that are actually playing in sports that these bills are targeting.
So, it's I hardly know what to say, because I would think that human rights belong to everyone, and that trans rights are human rights, and I think we must do more to ensure that the trans community and the LGBTQ plus community more broadly can live as their authentic selves, free from the threat of and real violence or discrimination. So, Ms. Walker, thank you very much for being here. Do you play in sports? Do you participate or compete in sports?
I do not.
So would you say that most, I would think that most transgender girls are not competing in sports, but you just want to be able to be free from these kinds of totally discriminatory laws that does not allow you to be yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Whereas I don't personally compete in sports, so I can't speak for the trans kids that do compete in sports. I will say that it's even more scary for us in situations like that, because can you imagine somebody like me having to compete in a men's sports team? That would be detrimental to my mental health, and I would feel unsafe. And so I think things like the Equality Act are necessary to protect these trans people from discrimination, because I have the right as a woman, just as Ms. Gaines has the right as a woman to compete in women's sports. And just because I wasn't born in a female body doesn't mean I don't have that same right.
Thank you. And as long as we're focusing on sports, of course, we know that there are huge differences in so-called male sports and the support that's given to male sports and so-called male athletes versus women's sports. And, there's all kinds of data about the discrimination in these so-called male and so-called female sports. In fact, one of my colleagues, who is very much opposed to transgender persons competing in female sports, said if we allow transgender persons to compete against females, that we're going to see coaches encouraging boys to become transgender to compete against girls. Ms. Robinson, is this what's happening in sports?
No, it is not. There is an incredible process that people have to go through to come out that can be painful, that's about exposing yourself to your family, to your friends in different ways. I can't imagine someone enduring all of that simply to play a sport. These are people that are only trying to live, as Harley has told us, to play sports that match their gender identities so that they can get all the positive benefits that we've talked about: self-esteem building, self-confidence, the ability to work within a team. I just can't see why we would deny that opportunity to children as young as 5 years old.
One last question. So we have all of these laws, Don't Say Gay and other kind of laws. Maybe this is a question for Dr. Lopez. As you work with transgender community, LGBTQ persons, so what do these kinds of bans on books, what kind of impact do they have on the persons that you treat?
Well, these are, one has to remember that transgender children and adolescents are already a vulnerable population. They have to make an extra effort compared to non-transgender children to socialize, to feel like they belong, to participate in sports, which they have the right to, as Harley said. And if there's already a climate of you can be targeted, you will be treated differently, these kids tend to isolate themselves. I have patients who have no friends, like 0 friends. I have patients that just do online or homeschool because they're terrified about going to school, let alone participate in sports. That can be terrifying for them. And I have one patient that I saw last week that the mom told me is a 12-year-old who plays soccer, and it's not competitive, it's just with the school. And she told me, this bill is going to be devastating for my child. I will have to move out of state if the bill that bans sports participation passes, because that has kept my child alive. That was the thing that helped me engage and feel accepted with peers. So yes, all this climate is really harming the social life and the growth of these my patients, of these kids.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Appreciate this hearing, Chairman. Appreciate the panel being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, General, on your nomination. I thank you and your family for your service to our country. To ensure the fitness of all nominees who appear before any of the committees on which I sit, I ask the nominees the following 2 initial questions. 1, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
I have not.
2, have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
I have not.
General, I thank you for your consistent support for our service members' access to critical health care no matter where they are stationed around the world. And as we face recruitment and retention challenges across the services, support for service members of all backgrounds is critical. And for almost 4 decades now, you have built inclusive, diverse, and ready teams in the Air Force, and I assume you will support such teams throughout the DoD. When we had a chance to chat yesterday, you gave me an example of how important the DEI programs, as we refer to diversity, equity, and inclusive programs, are within the military. You talked about your own experience. Can you share with this committee what you shared with me yesterday?
Sure, Senator. I think about, for my own career and for all of our members, all they want is a fair opportunity to perform. And by providing them that fair opportunity, they do not want to be advantaged or disadvantaged or discounted based on their background. They want to have the opportunity, but they got to be qualified. And I'll just tell you from my own career, when I came in and flying F-16s, I didn't want to be the best African-American F-16 pilot. I wanted to be the best F-16 pilot. I would say the same thing when I went to be an instructor at the go to weapons school, to go back as an instructor, be the commandant. In every position I've had throughout my career, I wanted it because I was the best and qualified. I did not want to be provided a position or promotion based on my background. I wanted it based on the quality of my work. And I think that's the aspect that all of our service members look for, is they want a fair opportunity, but they also want to be rewarded for their performance.
And when we have this discussion, fair opportunity means that they are able to have experiences that they may otherwise not have access to, and that is the importance, in my view, of the attention being paid to the importance of diversity in our services and the fairness that diversity provides. If confirmed, you will be the highest ranking officer in the U.S. military, which gives you a unique perspective on the burden of command. I have repeatedly asked for leadership accountability and structural changes from the DoD in the wake of high-profile failures in Hawaii, for example, the disaster at Red Hill, which I'm sure you are familiar with, and that disaster has led to public mistrust in the military in Hawaii. General Brown, how do you view the burden of command and the ultimate responsibility entrusted in military commanders?
There are two factors I think about in the responsibility command or leadership at any level. You have the responsibility to get the mission done, but you're also accountable for the mission as well. And that accountability, if it doesn't go well, you should be held accountable. And those are the areas that I focus on and ensure that we maintain the standard across the military, but at the same time maintain the public confidence from the American people that we do support.
I think that if we don't hold our commanders responsible, that it does continue to shake the faith that communities have in the leadership of the military. And as the chief of the Joint Chiefs, you are going to have major responsibility to make sure that the burden of command, as I've expressed it, is carried through. I just visited with the Deputy Secretary of the DoD, our shipyards, and I just want to make sure that you will continue to support the modernization of our shipyards, because even as we make decisions to build new ships, i.e. assets, that we have to make sure that we have the capability to repair and maintain the ships that we already have, and that means that the shipyard improvement commitment has to continue, and this is a multi-year commitment. I'd like to have your commitment that we will continue to fund this very critical part of our military readiness.
Senator, you have my commitment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, General. Chairman, the time expired.
Thank you, Senator Budd. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General George, welcome. Thank you very much for your service and your commitment to continuing to serve. And of course, aloha to your family, because we all know that when you serve, your family also serves. We've had over the last 2 days the hearings on two really important nominations. Yesterday was General Brown to be the Chair of the Joint Chiefs, and today you to be the Chief of Staff for the Army. It has been made abundantly clear how damaging the holds that Senator Tuberville has placed on military promotions is. And yesterday I note that Senator Tuberville, in his questioning of General Brown for his position, said if there's anything he can do to help General Brown. And I would say, and I would join my colleagues in saying, Senator Tuberville, you have made your point. And I ask you to lift your hold because, as I said, it has been made abundantly clear by all of you testifying that that these holds are creating much damage to our readiness, our ability of our military to proceed. So there's that for Senator Tuberville. General George, as part of my responsibilities, I want to ensure the fitness of all nominees who come before any of the committees on which I serve for fitness to serve, and I ask the following two initial questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, I haven't, Senator.
General George, I've been sitting here for a while, and I very much appreciate your very thoughtful responses to the questions that have been put to you, and especially relating to very sensitive issues such as suicide, and I would say the continuing scourge of sexual assault and harassment in the military. I appreciate your thoughtful responses. As the chair of the Readiness Subcommittee, I have made very clear the importance of infrastructure as a top priority. And the Army, like every service, has a deep backlog of maintenance and modernization for its facilities and basic infrastructure. And in fact, in Hawaii, there is a backlog of almost $5 billion in facilities maintenance and modernization, and that is the deficit. We discussed this yesterday. Where does infrastructure replacement, repair, and maintenance stand in your order of priorities for the Army?
Well, I'll tell you, Senator, that it's integral. Our job is to be prepared to fight and win our nation's wars, and having the right infrastructure, depending on what it is a critical aspect of that. You know, in Hawaii, how critical Schofield and everything that we have out there, the training area, PTA is to us out there. So we have to pay attention to that. It gets to recruiting as well. If you don't have the right infrastructure, you know, that has an impact on your workforce. And so I would say it's of critical importance to us.
There is such a huge infrastructure deficit throughout the DoD, but you know the Army has a huge presence in Hawaii as well as in other places. And what I'd like to see going forward under your leadership is a more obvious commitment to infrastructure replacement, maintenance, modernization. I don't really see that as a commitment. We wait until things fall apart, you know, where electricity goes out at Tripler, the major hospital in Hawaii, and you can't have that, and not to mention the huge concerns regarding Red Hill. So you did mention the importance of renegotiating our leases for training, especially Pohakaloa, and part of those renegotiations is very much talking with the community. So I'd like to have your commitment that you will make sure that kind of outreach is occurring. The last thing we need to happen for these really critical training areas is some concerns raised that we have not addressed due to some lack of outreach and continuing discussions with, especially the Native Hawaiian community.
I agree with you 100%, Senator, and we will partner with the local community. I know they're doing that right now.
And as we're doing these leases, I think that there may be an opportunity for the Army to really look at its needs and return some of the land to the states. So that kind of a process, I think, is very important. I hope you will conduct that, and with a view of returning land that you don't need to the state.
Okay, Senator, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To ensure the fitness of all nominees who appear before any of the committees on which I sit, I ask the following two initial questions, which I will ask each of the panel, each of the nominees, and we'll start with Mr. Edwards. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards, as an assistant U.S. attorney, you were an attorney in lawsuits successfully requiring local schools to desegregate and bring in more minority students and faculty. What is the importance of these desegregation orders to the community, and how do they advance our nation's ongoing commitment to equality?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I, as chief of our civil division in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Louisiana, I assisted my colleagues here in Washington with the ongoing consent decree matters pending in our district. And I can say that all of those cases worked toward ensuring that past vestiges of de jure discrimination were being remedied.
Thank you for that, because I do think that we still face issues relating to racial discrimination and equality in our country. That is for certain. You also served as chair of the Louisiana Judiciary Committee, receiving complaints against state judicial officers. So you evaluated the character and fitness of candidates for the state bar, among other things. So why are judicial ethics and judicial integrity important to the justice system?
Senator, judicial ethics is very important to public confidence in the judicial system. In courts, generally, someone is going to be disappointed in the outcome of a case, but judicial ethics, if properly followed, can ensure that everyone has confidence in the process that they went through to reach that outcome.
I think I am relating to the fact that our Supreme Court does not have a code of ethics. I won't put you on the spot with that one, but there are some of us here who consider that very important. For Judge Maddox, among your speaking engagements, you served as a presiding judge in naturalization ceremonies for New Americans. And these are important civic events that bring together communities and our country's newest citizens. What did it mean to you to participate in the naturalization ceremonies, and what lessons did you learn when you presided over these ceremonies?
Oh, thank you for that question, Senator. I can say that my experience presiding at naturalization ceremonies may be among the most gratifying experiences that I've had as a judge. Never as a judge do you get an opportunity to see so many smiling faces in the same place, and everybody walk in happy and everybody walk out happy, where nobody loses. But more importantly, the lesson that I draw from each of those events is the vast range of experiences that bring the people in that room to that room. And they meet in the same place, but they come from literally all over the world. And there must be something that they hold in common that brings them there. And what they hold in common becomes evident in the course of that ceremony. They've picked this country out of anywhere else in the world to live out the rest of their lives. So there's something special about this country that brings everyone into that room from all over the world. And to be reminded of that and the gravity of that, I think is humbling as a judge, and it's a lesson that I take with me in my work throughout my caseload.
We often refer to our country as a country of immigrants, except for the Native peoples who were here long before the white people came. So yes, I think it is really important that the naturalization ceremonies, which I have also participated in, both as a naturalized citizen but also as a member of Congress, have been very, very touching to see all these people who come to our country with the promise that our country holds for a better life for themselves and their families. And that is very, very obvious. And, there are tears and, as you say, a lot of smiles. Thank you very much for your participation in these very important ceremonies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hirono. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing is happening when millions of people in this country, as well as around the world, are suffering through record-breaking heat following up on the hottest June ever recorded. And literally, when you see people being injured just by stepping on sidewalks, et cetera, where you see the enormity of the concerns. So we are on a path towards even more intense heat, wildfires, and extreme weather unless we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by shifting to solar power and other lower-cost, zero-carbon sources. Democrats in Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act to help speed the transition to clean energy. And we need to build new clean sources of energy in a fair manner and at a pace that reflects the severity of the global warming we are facing. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this panel or this hearing. For Mr. Tepley, your testimony states your company, quote, is a strong believer in NEPA and the environmental impact statement process. We use the EIS process to engage with affected communities and understand their needs, and in our experience, the EIS process helps us identify modifications we can make to pipeline projects that will avoid or mitigate adverse impacts on the environment. My question to you, do you think Congress should consider federal grants to state, tribal, and local agencies and to community-based organizations to increase their capacity for completing state, tribal, and local environmental reviews?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. As Williams, we are very much so focused on stakeholder engagement throughout our project development processes, including engaging our environmental justice community, our tribes, in areas that we operate in and have infrastructure that affects those folks. We spend a lot of time through the early project development, engaging, identifying potential workarounds, including reciting where important or where possible and practical. So we do think that the engagement at the stakeholder level is extremely important, and we think that we are doing a good job of.
Well, actually, the question was whether you think that these stakeholders should should increase their capacity to engage in the process, because these are complicated issues. And in fact, Senator Copper proposed such a grant program to enable these stakeholders to better engage in the process. I think that's probably a good idea.
Yes, I think, as an example, we've engaged with the FERC Office of Public Participation, which is very similar to what you're describing. Very early on as that department was stood up, with a keen interest in having a seat at the table with them as that process plays through FERC.
And providing some funding for them could even maybe shorten the entire process of review. For Mr. Smythe, in Hawaii, we have smaller capacity transmission lines compared to your company's lines. How much benefit to the capacity and reliability of the grid can come from upgrading the lines in existing transmission pathways?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think that you can see benefits when you upsize transmission lines, but you want to right-size transmission lines as well. So it really depends upon the use case, but generally speaking, as more demand, as demand increases and supply changes, upsizing the capacity of transmission lines can drive good outcomes for customers.
And then to change the transmission lines, we're talking about a pretty expensive proposition. So do electric companies, utility companies have the right incentives to invest in upgrading existing lines compared to building new lines?
Yes, we believe they do.
You think that they currently have those kinds of incentives?
Yes, I do believe the incentives are there. I do believe that we need to modify the planning processes. We need to modify cost allocation, and we need to do things that make it easier to move through the processes.
So speaking of cost allocations, can you elaborate on how you think regulators should measure and determine the public benefit of new transmission lines, and how that going to new transmission lines expenditure should be allocated to the ratepayers as opposed to the utilities?
Yes, we believe that beneficiaries and payers should be aligned. We think that benefits should be calculated in a broad manner that include all reasonable reliability and economic benefits, and the cost should be distributed accordingly.
That may be easier said than done, because Hawaii, for example, I think it still pays the highest rates in the country for electricity. So anytime there's a potential for increasing those costs, there are going to be concerns raised.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Start with Judge Michalczyk. So there's been a number of instances where you have been criticized or reversed, but as I look at your record, I think you are uniquely qualified to serve on the federal bench. In fact, the person whose seat you will be sitting on, the judicial vacancy you'll be sitting on, wrote a letter of recommendation for you should you be confirmed. And in fact, out of more than 1,200 cases, only 31 involved any reversal or a substantial criticism by a reviewing court. That is a success rate of 97.4%. That is a pretty good batting average in anybody's opinion. So you've had extensive experience. You are the chief magistrate judge. As I said, you've authored over 1,200 memorandum opinions, reports, and recommendations. You've been on the bench for 10 years. You got a recommendation, as I said, from the judge who you will be replacing. If confirmed, how has your extensive experience as a federal magistrate judge prepared you to serve on the federal district court?
Thank you, Senator. In my 10 years as a magistrate judge, I have issued, like you referenced, over 1,200 written opinions and reports and recommendations. I've issued over 1,000 orders in criminal matters related to detention and release. And I have presided over a number of civil trials to verdict. I have presided over criminal misdemeanor trials to verdict and petty offense trials. All of that experience translates directly to the work I would be doing as a district judge in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. And I believe that extensive record prepares me well for the position of district judge in the Middle District of Pennsylvania.
I agree with you regarding your experiences and preparation. I would like to go back to two questions that I ask of all nominees to any of the committees on which I sit. So I will ask each of you, and we'll just go down the line very quickly, starting with Ms. Garrett. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator, I have not.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Second question, have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
For Judge Hall, I don't think it's often that we have a nominee who has a PhD in biochemistry. That is highly impressive, I'd say. So as a magistrate judge, you have organized multiple events to encourage attorneys to participate in pro bono legal services for survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, and sexual abuse. Why is pro bono service important, particularly for this uniquely vulnerable community?
Well, I think as the Supreme Court has recognized, our legal system is very complicated, and having an attorney is often essential to litigate in the federal court.
For Ms. McMillan, you also have quite a lot of pro bono hours. Prior to entering public service with the U.S. Attorney's Office, you dedicated over 100 hours a year to pro bono matters while in private practice, and this included civil rights complaints and asylum applications. Why is pro bono service so important to you?
Senator, I believe that everyone deserves representation in our legal system. And for those that are not fortunate enough to be able to afford that representation, I think that it's very important that for the justice system to work, that we provide representation to all, and that quality representation be presented to people regardless of background.
For Ms. Wang, I note that you are an immigrant, and so you came here at the age of 5, and your career was inspired by your father's American dream. How has your personal experience as an immigrant informed your work in international trade? And if confirmed, how will it inform your work as a judge on the U.S. Court of International Trade?
Senator, first, thank you for recognizing my father. He passed away a few years ago and is the greatest inspiration of my life. He came to the United States with a dream for fairness and equal opportunity. And it's through that belief that I entered international trade, because international trade at its fundamental core is about fairness. And as an Assistant Secretary of Commerce right now, I've traveled across the country talking to U.S. businesses and workers about fairness and leveling the playing field against unfair trade practices. I think I would carry all of that with me should I be confirmed to the U.S. Court of International Trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think we have a very, very well-qualified panel today.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nomination.
Mr. President, First Lady, thank you so much for being here to listen to the local people and to see for yourself the devastation that will require a lot of federal resources. Mr. President, you and Vice President Kamala Harris were among the first people to call me in the early days of this growing disaster. And the fires that raced through this town consumed practically everything in its path. Lives were lost. Our hearts go out to all of the people who lost loved ones and who lost everything in a matter of minutes. I was at the County Collection Distribution Center earlier this morning in the Sears parking lot. And what this devastation has led to are the people of Maui coming forward to donate their time, their resources, their homes to help their neighbors. And I even saw tourists who were helping, volunteering at this center, at this collection facility in the last days of their vacations here because they know that their help would matter. And of course, the federal family of agencies, starting with FEMA. Bob, you have been through many of these disasters. You are a person who will help us recover. So all of our family of federal agencies, FEMA, the Department of Defense, Interior, HUD, Army Corps of Engineers, SBA, they were all here from the very beginning to provide the help that we need. And my hope is that Lahaina and Upcountry will rebuild in a way that we will listen to the people here. And that hope is represented by this banyan tree that stands here. Well, all around things burn, the banyan tree stands, and it is a symbol of hope. And when I talk with the arborist who is here to make sure that this tree survives, he said that the tree will tell us what it needs, and our job is to listen. And that is our job, to listen to the people of Maui, to listen to the people of Lahaina as we rebuild. Mahalo nui loa to all of you who are here, and most especially to the President, First Lady. We will rebuild, and we will rebuild listening to the voices and the values of the people here. Now I turn to Jill Takuda, our newest member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations. I ask the following two questions of all nominees for any of the committees on which I sit. So I will ask each of you, and we'll start with Judge Bryan in responding. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator. Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
No.
No. Judge Bryan, I must say that presiding over 8,000 cases and 100 or 120 trials, that is impressive, and to be reversed only 9 times. Now, I note that you testified that you apply precedent faithfully and objectively in deciding your cases. I think you said that.
Yes.
That's commendable. And Ms. Lee, you have been questioned by some of my colleagues about things you have written, and ostensibly maybe those things reflect your views on certain things, but would you agree with Judge Bryan that the way you've been a judge for 5 years now, is that correct?
That's right.
And that you too apply the law faithfully and objectively in
yes,
deciding?
Yes, Senator. It's one of the things I take very seriously, and similarly in terms of the reversal rate, which I've had, which is only less than 3 have tried to do and reflect, I think, as well. Reflects in my record as well.
Regarding your writing that talked about how transgender persons, immigrants, and racial minorities are treated in prison, I can agree with you that and with Judge Bryan that these are, I would say, marginalized groups, and basically you and I in particular. You and I are part of the marginalized groups. We know how people can be treated in a way that is highly discriminatory. So I can only envision that in a prison setting, that becomes even more. It can become even more pronounced in terms of discrimination. So you have an understanding of those kinds of environments. Thank you very much for that. Now, both you and Judge Bryan have talked about how important mentoring is. Can you just describe a little bit more about someone whose mentoring meant so much to you, Judge Lee?
There have been multiple people. I've been very fortunate, both in terms of the district court judge who I had mentioned, Jerome Turner, and as I'd mentioned earlier, we were very different people coming from different backgrounds, but he embedded me a fundamental respect and was very rigorous about it in terms of the rule of law and the value of precedence. We might disagree about a lot of things, but we always agreed about the law. And in terms of doing that, I've held that rigor in terms of my analysis as a judge now, making sure that I'm following binding precedent otherwise, and applying it. And then for the Ninth Circuit, I would say Judge Turner always told me to go back to the community, and I've tried to do so. I mean, Judge Ferguson has always told me to go back, and I've tried to do so.
One of the things that you wrote about is the barriers facing formerly incarcerated people upon reentry, and how important it is to provide them avenues where they can reenter the community. And recently, the only federal halfway house in my state of Hawaii was closed, and this reentry facility was vital to our community, and I have been fighting to reopen this facility in order to provide these important services. Could you tell us briefly more about the importance of having a reentry program for decreasing recidivism and reintegrating formerly incarcerated people who, by the way, most incarcerated people do get back into the community? Why are these reentry programs so important?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think, as you mentioned, at the time when that piece was written and discussing, it was a relatively new issue and one which I was not as familiar with. Later on, when I was at Hastings, making sure that people knew service to be provided, making sure that they knew the remedies which they would have is something I focused on later on while I was at UC Hastings. And across the board, it's important that for public safety that we go back and make sure that people can be reintegrated within society. And so I had done some of that work when I was at UC Hastings.
I would say that every federal prison program should have a reentry kind of program. Mr. Chairman, may I just make one comment regarding Ms. Robinson? She has not been getting very many questions, but you went into how important diversity is in the IP area, and completely agree with you, because we know that women and minorities are not very much represented in terms of people who get patents and all of that. So I would expect that you will do everything you can to have women and minorities be very much a part of a system that really means innovation and leadership in our country.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. I want to apologize to the nominees and their families and friends that I have to step out. There's a roll call vote.
Mr. President, tomorrow marks 1 month since the devastating fires that destroyed the historic town of Lahaina on Maui and damaged several of Maui's upcountry communities. These devastating fires and the events that followed have been harrowing for all those who call Maui home and the many more who have visited these communities over the years. Initial estimates suggest the fires destroyed nearly 3,000 structures in Lahaina, almost 90% of which were residential. It also leveled roughly 700 businesses on and around Lahaina's historic Front Street. And tragically, the fires have claimed 115 lives to date, with some 385 people still unaccounted for. These numbers are devastating and reflect the pain and anguish Hawaii is feeling. But, Mr. President, this disaster did not simply impact a collection of numbers or statistics. It impacted a community of people, tight-knit and proud. Business owners who served as stewards of family-owned shops and restaurants passed down through the generations. Immigrants who came to Maui in search of a better life for themselves and their families. Firefighters who raced into horrific, toxic conditions to try and save the town they loved, even as many of their own homes burned to the ground mere miles away. And so many more who called Lahaina home. As the one-time capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii, Lahaina holds great cultural and historic significance for the Native Hawaiian community. For some families, their roots in Lahaina date back more than a century, with homes passed down from generation to generation. Others came from elsewhere, captivated by Lahaina's beauty and charm. And before the fires, Lahaina was a bustling seaside town that welcomed thousands of visitors every month. But in mere moments, all of that was destroyed as 80 miles per hour winds, fueled by a hurricane 500 miles away, propelled the fire through the town with unimaginable speed and fury. The devastation is difficult to put into words, as is the trauma this community is experiencing. Front Street, once vibrant with the sounds of music and revelers in the air, is now eerily quiet. The only sound to be heard is often the clanging of twisted metal in the wind. At the hotels where survivors are staying, I met parents afraid to send their children to school, not wanting them out of their sight. I met a woman who escaped the fire with just a backpack of belongings, a backpack she now takes everywhere with her, refusing to take it off her back. And I met hotel workers and others, especially a health worker, who said that weeks after the fires, some residents and workers were so traumatized they didn't even want to come out of their rooms. At the same time, Mr. President, at a time of grief and loss, residents have been subjected to disinformation on social media, likely coordinated by foreign government entities to discourage residents from reaching out to FEMA for disaster assistance, and disinformation that sowed distrust in the federal government. It is an all-hands-on-deck effort to combat this kind of disinformation and make sure survivors can access federal support. As we work to ensure the survivors of this disaster have the support they need, we're also working to understand the full cost of the devastation. According to initial estimates, the damage to property alone from these fires is upwards of $5 billion. Estimates for rebuilding Lahaina are more than double that. Rebuilding will take time, resources, and a continuity of effort. And that's why I'm so grateful for the strong response of the full family of federal agencies, more than 25 of which are on the ground on Maui with over 1,000 personnel. From FEMA and SBA to HHS, HUD, DOD, and so many others. The federal family responded with speed to meet the immediate needs of those impacted. Within days of the fires starting, FEMA, working with the governor, mayor, and local entities, was able to get thousands of survivors into hotel rooms, Airbnbs, and other short-term shelters. To date, more than $50 million in federal assistance to individuals has already been approved. But we know that this is just the beginning. Federal personnel have also been critical to the search and rescue efforts, coming from around the country to help search through the rubble and identify the remains of those lost. When President Biden visited last month, he made a commitment that the federal government will be there for as long as it takes to help Lahaina recover and rebuild as the community envisions. The $4 billion in additional FEMA funding the president requested late last week is an important down payment on that promise. This funding will help ensure FEMA has the resources it needs to continue its critical disaster relief work, not just on Maui, but on other communities impacted by disasters all across our country. I hope that it will pass with strong bipartisan support, as has long been the case for disaster relief funding. But we know, as I said before, this is just the beginning. In the decades since Hurricane Sandy wreaked havoc on New York and New Jersey, FEMA has spent more than $18 billion assisting impacted communities. FEMA's long-term costs for its response to Hurricane Katrina in 2005 exceeded $60 billion. Like those communities, Lahaina's rebuilding will take time, and as I said before, a continuity of effort. These fires took so much from so many, but the spirit of aloha, of love, kindness, and care for one another continues. It is that aloha that brought our community together after this crisis, and I have faith that it will continue to see us through. I will be here along with my colleagues from Hawaii. My other senator, Brian Schatz, is here as part of our delegation to fight for everything Hawaii and Maui needs to recover and rebuild, guided by the voices and values of those who call Lahaina home. Madam President, I yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nobody's talking about interfering with the right of a parent to determine what kind of material his or her child should have access to. The issue really is the ability of a group of people, not even parents of students in schools, but a group of people or individuals who are able to go into a school district, a school board, in an effort to ban certain books. That is really the issue. And by any definition, I would consider that kind of effort to be an effort on book banning. And in fact, there are states that have already enacted legislation that makes it pretty easy to for anybody to go in and list a book as inappropriate and therefore removed until it goes through some sort of a review process. I'm specifically talking about Florida as an example. So, Professor Knox, you've done some research on why there is this effort to ban books. Can you tell me what sorts of books are usually get on these banned book lists?
Yeah, I would say that, thank you for the question. So the books that usually show up on banned books lists are books that we consider to be diverse. And these are basically books about anybody who is not white, heterosexual, male, cis, books that are about LGBTQIA people, about people of color. These sorts of books are the books that we see on the banned books list. And I do want to address the idea of banning books. So really what we often say is that these books are not banned, but they are challenged. Mm-hmm. So like Biden's border crisis, Banned Books Week has a nice alliterative ring to it, but in fact, we talk much more about challenging books. And what this is removing books from access to its intended audience. So that includes both age appropriateness, but also who did the author intend this book to be read by? That is an important part of thinking about what we call collection development in libraries. We consider all sorts of issues when books are put in a collection, not just issues of, do we agree with what is being put on the collection, but also how do we show many different viewpoints and ideas. When we look at the diverse books that...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do understand that the target of a lot of these kinds of lists is books that depict diverse lifestyles, for example, if you want to call it that. And so, for example, one of the books that is being sought or challenged in Iowa is a book called Ho'onani Hula Warrior. This is a book about a child who doesn't see herself as a girl or a boy, but something in between. And this child dreams of leading the hula group, but everyone else thinks that only the boys should lead the hula group. And Native Hawaiians have traditionally recognized the existence of a third gender called mahu, and this book explores this and many other parts of Native Hawaiian culture. Yet this book could potentially be banned, as I mentioned, from a school district in Iowa for running afoul of a law against books for younger grades that deal with gender identity. Mr. Giannoulias, do you think, and also with Dr. Cox, do you think this book should be removed from school libraries?
Thank you, Senator. I personally do not, which goes again to the fundamental nature of our legislation, which is to allow librarians to make that decision. Okay. My guess is they would determine this book belongs in our libraries. The point I also want to make is, especially with regard to Hula Warrior, the goal of literature is to reflect back to the reader either the struggles that the reader is facing or to provide insight into struggles that the reader has never had to imagine. Books are a safe place for people who are struggling, who need help. And I would disagree with one of the opponents here today.
I do need to get to, sorry, and I don't even need the answer from Dr. Cox, but I do have another question for you. Is there any evidence that says that exposure to certain kinds of books leads to harm to a community? Does exposure to an LGBTQ plus book somehow cause harm to the reader? Is there any evidence to that effect?
Zero.
No, there is not. What I mentioned before is that books can be windows to learn about other people. So it might be that you have a friend who is thinking about their own gender identity and you want to know more. And reading a book like that one will help you understand what your friend is going through.
Mr. Chairman, I should think that there is more harm to a young person who thinks that he or she can be shot to death in a school than being exposed to certain kinds of subjects and books. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Lee.
I'm going to be showing a video clip of Senator Klobuchar, Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, it's good to see you again. So every time we have one of these hearings, we learn something new, but the conclusion I've drawn is that AI is ubiquitous. Anybody can use AI. It can be used in any endeavor. So when I hear you folks testifying about how we shouldn't be taking half measures, I'm not sure what that means. What does it mean not taking half measure on something as ubiquitous as AI, where there are other regulatory schemes that can touch upon those endeavors that use AI? So, there's always the question I have of when we address something as complex as how AI is looking, that there are unintended consequences that we should care about. Would you agree? Anybody? Mr. Smith?
I would absolutely agree. I think we have to define what's a full measure and what's a half measure, but I bet we can all agree that half measures are not good enough.
Well, that is the thing, how to recognize, going forward, what is actually going to help us with this powerful tool. So I have a question for you, Mr. Smith. It is a powerful tool that can be used for either good, or it can also be used to spread a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and that happened during the disaster on Maui. And Maui residents were subject to disinformation, some of it coming from foreign governments, i.e. Russia, looking to sow confusion and distrust, including don't sign up for FEMA because they cannot be trusted. And I worry that with AI, such information will only become more rampant with future disasters. Do you share my concern about misinformation in the disaster context and the role AI could play? And what can we do to prevent these foreign entities from pushing out AI disinformation to people who are very vulnerable?
I absolutely share your concern. And I think there's two things we need to think about doing. First, let's use the power of AI as we are to detect these kinds of activities when they're taking place, because they can enable us to go faster, as they did in that instance where Microsoft, among others, used AI and other data technologies to identify what people were doing. Number two, I just think we need to stand up as a country and with other governments and with the public and say there need to be some clear red lines in the world today, regardless of how much else or what else we disagree about. When you think about what happens typically in the wake of an earthquake or a hurricane or a tsunami or a flood, the world comes together. People are generous. They help provide relief. And then let's look at what happened after the fire in Maui. It was the opposite of that. We had some people, not necessarily directed by the Kremlin, but people who regularly spread Russian propaganda, trying to discourage the people of Lahaina from going to the agencies that could help them. That's inexcusable. And we saw what we believe is Chinese-directed activity trying to persuade the world in multiple languages that the fire was caused by the United States government itself using a meteorological weapon. Those are the things that we should all try to bring the international community together and agree they're off limits.
Well, how do we identify that this is even occurring, that there is, China or Russia-directed misinformation going on? How do we... I didn't know this was happening, by the way, and even in the Energy Committee on which I sit, we had people testify, and I asked, regarding the Maui disaster, I asked one of the testifiers whether he was aware that there had been disinformation put out by a foreign government in that example, and he said yes, but I don't know that the people of Maui recognized that was going on. So how do we, one, even identify that that's going on, and then to come forward and say this is happening, and to name names, identify which country it is that is spreading this kind of disinformation and misinformation?
I think we have to think about two things. First, I think we at a company like Microsoft have to lean in, and we are, with data, with infrastructure, with experts, and real-time capability to spot these threats, find the patterns, and reach well-founded conclusions. And then the second thing, this is the harder thing, this is where it's going to need all of your help. What do we do if we find that a foreign government is deliberately trying to spread false information next year in a Senate or presidential campaign about a candidate? How do we create the room so that information can be shared and people will consider it?
Yes.
You all, with this, the most important word in your framework is bipartisan. How do we create the bipartisan framework so that when we find this, we create a climate where people can listen? I think we have to look at both of those parts of the problem together.
Well, I hope we can do that. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, one of the concerns about AI from the worker standpoint is that their jobs will be gone. And Professor Herzog, you mentioned that that generative AI can result in job losses. And for both you and Mr. Smith, what are the kinds of jobs that will be lost to AI?
That's an excellent question. It's difficult to project that into the future, but I would start with saying that not necessarily something that can be automated effectively, but things that I think that those that control the purse strings think could be automated effectively. And if it gets to the point where it appears as though it could, I imagine you'll see industry move in that direction.
Mr. Smith, I think you mentioned in your book, which I am listening to, that things like ordering something out of a drive-through, that those jobs could be gone to AI.
Yeah, I was, 4 years ago, we published our book with my co-author behind me, and we said, what's the first job that we think might be eliminated by AI? We don't have a crystal ball, but I bet it's taking an order in the drive-through of a fast food restaurant. You're not really establishing a rapport with the human being. All the person does is listen and type into a computer what you're saying. So when AI can hear as well as a person, it can enter that in. And indeed, I was struck a few months ago, Wendy's, I think it was, announced that they were starting to consider whether they would automate with AI the drive-through. I think there's a lesson, though, in that. And it should give us both pause, but I think a little bit of optimism. There's no creativity involved in a drive-through, at least, listening and entering an order. There are so many jobs that do involve creativity. So the real hope, I think, is to use AI to automate the routine, maybe even the work that's boring, to free people up so they can be more creative, so they can focus more on paying attention to other people and helping them. And if we just apply that recipe more broadly, I think we might put ourselves on a path that's more promising.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing.
I'd like to clarify a few things. For example, according to the Cato Institute, U.S. citizens were 89% of those convicted of fentanyl trafficking in 2022. 93% of fentanyl seizures happened at legal crossings or interior checkpoints. In other words, a lot of the fentanyl coming into our country are not by so-called illegal immigrants, but by U.S. citizens. Also, this whole notion of all these people who don't even qualify for asylum clogging the system, the fact is, detained individuals with attorneys, that is the critical point here, that people who have attorneys are 10.5 times more likely to be granted relief. So it is when they have attorneys that they can proceed with their asylum claims. Our immigration system is complicated enough as it is. How are people who have language issues and other issues even supposed to come forth with their legitimate asylum claims if they can't even figure out what's supposed to happen? So this idea that there are all these people clogging the system, we should be more concerned, I would say, with providing lawyers for these claimants. And I particularly want to focus on what happens to unaccompanied children who don't have lawyers. And I've witnessed immigration proceedings and led a bipartisan congressional delegation to border facilities in Texas. While there, I saw that the government is always represented by counsel in these proceedings, or maybe not if they don't bother to even show up anymore. But there is no guarantee that children will also have a lawyer. And this is alarming because children are some of the most vulnerable people in our immigration system. I've heard from advocates, including Mr. McKinney today, who share stories of children going through the process, including a 4-year-old child whose attorney had to describe the immigration process using a comic book. As a 4-year-old, the child wasn't able to sign his name to the documents and instead had to make a squiggle mark. Or a 2-year-old who was so young that when the lawyer visited her, the child was in a playpen. When the 2-year-old saw the lawyer, she tried to give the attorney her teddy bear. The attorney tried to use a cartoon book to explain what was happening, but eventually had to use toys instead. Were it not for the many volunteer attorneys who represented them, these children, these babies, often would have been expected to represent themselves in court with the rest of their lives hanging in the balance. It is objectively ludicrous, not to mention, I would say, inhumane. These are just the stories we're aware of. Nearly half of all unaccompanied children go into the immigration court without a lawyer. For every child who is lucky enough to be represented by an attorney, another is left to fend for themselves. But setting aside the principles of due process, fairness, or even the fact that giving children an attorney is just a humane thing to do, the data itself supports the idea that children should be given lawyers, and that's why we should increase the chances of children being granted relief by providing them attorneys at an earlier point. It reduces waste by streamlining proceedings. It presents clear materials to the court. It ensures that children show up for their hearings. Children cannot represent themselves in court. It's that simple. And to give the judges more authority to just basically toss out hundreds of thousands of cases is not the answer. And that's why I have introduced the Fair Day in Court for Kids Act, which would provide unaccompanied children with legal representation when they go through the process earlier in the process. So, Mr. McKinley, why is having an attorney so crucial for unaccompanied children?
Thank you, Senator Hirono, and thank you for your efforts in this arena. Briefly put, because most of these children have viable claims before the immigration courts and our other agencies. From what I see, unaccompanied children have often been neglected, abused, or abandoned by one or both biological parents and could qualify for relief called special immigrant juvenile status in this country. But navigating that often requires a state custody proceeding as a prerequisite to seeking that relief. If you're unrepresented, the child's not going to know about this, and not to mention the asylum claims coming from our hemisphere right now. It's just horrific. So we need to do more to make sure those kids are represented.
So I heard the number 300,000 unaccompanied children are in the system. It's just pretty horrifying to me that they are expected to go through a very complicated, complex, I'm repeating myself, system without lawyers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for being here. I think
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Crane, we've heard Ms. Donaldson recommending that expanding funding for the DOE's Office of Inspector General by rescinding some of the funds given by Congress for carrying out the Infrastructure Reduction Act, Investment Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, including funding for programs under your oversight, would be a good thing. Does DOE have the legal authority to transfer funds to the Office of the Inspector General?
Senator Hirono, I'm not an expert in that. I do know, as you're saying, that the department, and I certainly support this, that the Inspector General office needs more funding. And I think we've asked for 92% more funding for the next fiscal year for the Inspector General's office, which of course we all support. The idea of can you reassign money, I'm new to government. I have no idea if you're allowed to do that.
Okay, well, you know what? Frankly, I believe that you do, in fact, do not have that authority. You should check, okay? Because while you agree that there should be more funds for the Inspector General that under the programs that I mentioned, under the acts that I mentioned, I don't think you have that authority. So maybe we need to change the law or something so that you can provide more funding. We should think about that. So one of the points made by Ms. Donaldson is that the vetting process, and Mr. Secretary Crane, you mentioned that the vetting center process has worked. Is this the three-person center that Ms. Donaldson referred to?
I don't think 3 persons is the current staffing of the.
What is the current staffing?
I'm not sure that that's, I mean, given the sensitive nature of what the vetting center does, I think it's more than double that in terms of the immediate employees, but they also leverage these other resources like the intelligence and counterintelligence office. Senator Hirono, what I would say is, at least in terms of the financial assistance programs, the vetting center takes as much time as they need to review all that they need to review. So if you look at the $10 billion of awards that we announced within the last week on transmission hydrogen, if it had not been for the vetting center process, we would have been announcing those awards at the beginning of September. So they take their time. It's only when they're done and they're comfortable that we move forward with selection.
Well, they have a big job to do, I take it, because it is the vetting center that makes all kinds of determinations relating to some 97 billion that the DOE got under these two acts that I mentioned. So even a doubling, that's 6 people. You can see that we have a concern about the adequacy of the resources that the vetting center has. And I think that it would behoove you to take a look at whether or not they are adequately sourced.
Senator, it's a very good point. They are staffing up, and the Inspector General's concerns, all of our concerns about the $92 billion, we are all aligned on that. What I'm just here to assure you is none of the awards that we've announced in the last couple months have gone out without being thoroughly vetted by.
I think it's very clear that we have concerns about making sure that the funds that were appropriated, historic funds, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done it. In fact, we're really behind the 8 ball in terms of climate change and the impact. So these bills, these acts were a good thing. We just want to make sure that, that these funds are going where they should. So turning to wildfires, excuse me. I did have a question about how a small state like Hawaii, hold on for a second. Where's my wildfire question? Thank you. So, Secretary Crane, communities in Maui are still recovering from the August wildfires, and one thing is certain, wildfire is becoming an increasing threat in communities all across Hawaii and in the West particularly. Various utilities, including in California and Oregon, have taken steps in recent years to improve their equipment to better monitor for and be resilient during wildfire events, and these steps have come at significant cost. For communities with a relatively small population and utility rate base, like those in Hawaii and the rural West, what role do you see the federal government playing in helping utilities become more prepared for increasing wildfire risk?
Senator, it's so important to every American that's exposed to that, and Hawaii did win one of the Wildfire Resilience Awards for Maui that was announced after the terrible fires there. The transmission awards that were just announced yesterday included 4 other awards across the western states for wildfire mitigation. And certainly, one of the good things about the transmission program is there's a second tranche of funds that are going to be put to solicitation within the next couple months. And certainly, we're very happy with the wildfire mitigation we're doing in the first round. We'd love to see more of it in the second round.
So basically, the role of the federal government is to provide resources, money, to enable smaller communities in rural areas and communities such as in our state to do the kind of mitigation that they need, that you are there as a source of funds.
Yes, sir, we're here to help.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say that those questions relating to Hamas, et cetera, they're rather mystifying. This is not the Foreign Relations Committee, but be that as it may. I asked the following initial questions of all nominees on any of the committees on which I sit, so I will ask these 2 questions of our panel. And by the way, welcome to each of you, and congratulations on your nominations. So, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature? Judge Keel, let's start with you, and we just go down the line.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
I have not, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
I have a short question for Mr. Fanzoni. You mentioned that that the best practices for OLC, you noted 3 things: frank and independent advice, I think your second was that this advice would be discussed, thoroughly vetted. And then the third is that the advice would be made public. So are these three aspects, best practices, being followed by OLC right now?
Senator, it's my understanding, and based on conversations I've had with the prior leader of OLC, that they do follow these best practices now.
Do you know when they started following these best practices?
I think they've been best practices for some time, and obviously they're ideals, and there may be times when people think that they don't, but I think the goal is always to follow those best practices.
That would be good, because I would not think that the torture memo was one that was the best kind of legal advice. Question for Judge Keel. I want to welcome your mother, because, where is she, by the way? Can you wave? Hi. 안녕하세요. So, you noted that her naturalization papers are in your office?
They're hanging with my father's naturalization certificate at the entrance to my chambers.
Aren't you also naturalized?
I was naturalized, but through my parents' naturalization. I was too young at the time.
Oh, okay. So you don't have a naturalization document hanging?
I do have a naturalization. I don't believe it's called a certificate. It's some other document that I have. It has my picture on it when I was a very young child.
Well, I can relate to that, because I have my naturalization document hanging in my office too. So it is a very important experience to not come to this country speaking any English or any of that. And to see you here, it's a proud moment for your family. Ms. Russell, you spent some time at the beginning of your career working in the Office of the Public Defender. And public defenders play a vital role in the justice system, as my colleague Peter Welch always notes, that is a really important experience for people who are going to be judges. So can you speak to the importance of having strong prosecutors and defense attorneys in our adversarial justice system?
So, Senator, I did have the opportunity following my clerkships to work at the Office of the Federal Public Defender in Connecticut. It was a great opportunity to learn my way around federal court, often appearing in different proceedings before the court and representing clients. I do think it's an important role in our system. So there's a Sixth Amendment guarantee of the right to counsel to everyone in the country, regardless of the nature of the offense. Serving that seeing that constitutional obligation carried out through the work of the office was rewarding, and I think gave me experience that would be helpful in a transition to a new role as a judge, where I'm so fortunate to be confirmed.
I note in your background that you've led or are leading a number of clinical programs at your law school. So is there a high percentage of the students at your law school who sign up for these clinical programs?
There are. Quinnipiac has a great experiential program. So we have most of our students taking either a clinic or an externship. And this is a great opportunity for the students to learn while they're in law school and go into practice already knowing some of the skills they need to know.
I have to say that the clinical program that I was in was one of my best experiences at the law school. For Judge Keel, can you talk a little bit about the importance of diversity on our bench?
Yes, Senator. Diversity, from my perspective, works two ways. First is the outward view of the court. It instills confidence in our judiciary when the public sees faces like theirs within the judiciary. I think that also instills confidence in the public that there's other people, judges that have had those life experiences as well. I think it also works inward because we have a very small number of people in chambers. I've been very fortunate to have a very diverse group of law clerks, interns, and staff members. We have great discussions and hearing different viewpoints and hearing different lived experiences certainly, I believe, helps me to be a better judge.
I agree with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Before recognizing Senator Kennedy, I want to acknowledge Judge McCasey's arrival. we're glad to have you back in the room. And Professor French has already told us about your travails in arriving here, but thank you very much for coming.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bahar, for testifying. I was curious about the fact that so many of the young people on these platforms are exposed to cyberbullying, and that can be anything. Your daughter experienced some of that because of some of the things that she posted online. So, but there is also an addictive quality to keeping these kids online. And for the platforms, keeping these kids online means money for them. What is it is there anything we can do to address the addictive aspect of what is happening to our young people, where they continue to go on to these platforms and expose themselves to this kind of harmful content?
Thank you for the question. I think that it is essential to have good data about the impact that this product has. And it's not that difficult. You could take a teenager after half an hour and go like, how are you doing? Are you feeling better or worse? And then use that information.
Let's say that we have this kind of data as to the harmful impact. What do you think we should do?
I think that products should adopt measures and, where appropriate, be compelled to figure out a good way to help teens have a use of the product that serves them. Because I think what happens right now is it distresses them. And what I experienced as a parent, and I think every parent here has experienced, is that sense of urgency of needing to be on there and the impact that it has on their emotions.
Do the young people understand the harmful impact themselves? Would it help if part of your testimony is about how all of us should understand what is happening? Would it help if the kids themselves also understand the harmful impacts? This is also an aspect of education, for example, of the young people. Would that help?
I think it helps to educate young people. I think what helps, in my experience, the most is changes to the product so that it's less harmful. And it's those changes and the refusal to do those changes.
So right now, there's not much incentive for these platforms to change their product because they face no consequences for the content. So meanwhile, dozens of states, including the state of Hawaii, where I come from, have sued these companies, including Meta, alleging that they designed their products to harm users. And I think most of these cases have been consolidated in California. The defendants are saying that they are limited in their liability exposure because of Section 230. You're not a lawyer, but if these companies were exposed to legal liability and these lawsuits, they're still pending, by the way, and if the companies are found liable and forced to pay money as a result of these lawsuits, do you think that would change their behavior as far as them paying attention to the harmful impact of the contents on their platforms?
I'm not a lawyer and not qualified to weigh in on that.
No, but you did testify that it's all about money for these companies. That's why they keep doing what they do. And if they were exposed to, if they had to pay money as a result of their content, do you think that would change their behavior?
My hope is, and what I believe will change their behavior, is the moment that Mark Zuckerberg, when he declares earnings, he has to say, last quarter we made $34 billion. And the next thing he has to say is, and in Instagram, this is the percentage of teens that experience unwanted sexual advances. That number would go down very quickly.
How would it go down?
Because they would be incentivized to work on it. Because right now there are no goals to reduce unwanted sexual advances, as far as I am aware.
Except that if there's no law that prevents them from having this kind of content, or there are no court cases, they're not held responsible for content. Then the fact that people know that they have that they have exposed these kids, so what? Right? And this is why there's so much attention being paid to Section 230 and the limited liability. In fact, no liability. They are protected from content. They do try, I suppose, and you say that they have a very limited definition of what is harmful content. But on the other hand, I'm all for doing more than we are currently doing. But, one of the things that can also happen, I led a letter asking the FTC to investigate Meta's alleged practice of censoring advertisements for health products related to menstruation. And there, Meta decided that this kind of advertisements was harmful. I hardly call that a very narrow definition of harm. So all these companies left to their own devices, they get to choose what they deem to be harmful. And in the examples that you cite, it's a very limited definition, but the example I cite, they've decided that women's health products, that is harmful, and they're going to censor those kinds of products. So, this is, it's a lot more complicated than at first, I guess, glimpse, but I know we're going to try and do something. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hirono.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, thank you for your patience. I want to begin today by reiterating my sadness about the passing of our friend, Senator Dianne Feinstein. Senator Feinstein's death strikes at the heart of so many of us committed to public service as she was. A courageous trailblazer, she stood up to powerful interest groups on behalf of her constituents and the rest of us. She was a fierce legislator fighting to ban assault weapons, defend survivors of domestic violence, protect our nation, and much more. But she was also a thoughtful friend. Just last week, she wrote me a letter expressing her happiness that the banyan tree in Lahaina, badly burned by the wildfires, is starting to show signs of renewed life. She wrote, "I hope that the beloved tree continues to recover and serve as a source of hope and a symbol of resilience for the entire community," end quote. She wrote, "I too share her hope." It's now been 6 weeks since the fires tore through the town of Lahaina on Maui, as well as in several upcountry Maui communities. As the whole world has seen now, those fires were devastating, claiming nearly 100 lives and destroying close to 3,000 structures, most of them residences. Our hearts break for all those impacted by this tragedy. Within hours of those fires, though, the federal government was on the ground providing assistance and relief. In the weeks since, well over 1,000 federal personnel have traveled to Maui to aid in the recovery efforts, and more than $125 million in individual relief has been distributed. Additionally, President Biden requested $4 billion in disaster relief funding following the fires, on top of the $12 billion he had previously requested. As I said at the time, disaster relief has always had broad bipartisan support, and there is no reason the Maui disaster should be treated any differently. In fact, Speaker McCarthy agreed. When he visited Lahaina less than 4 weeks ago, he said, and I quote, "We want to get the resources to individuals that could rebuild their life. We've got to focus on the children for the schools, get them back into the education so they don't miss out," end quote. I couldn't agree more. This funding is essential to our ongoing recovery efforts. But now, Speaker McCarthy, in refusing to stand up to the most radical faction in his caucus, I call them the Chaos Caucus, is endangering these resources for Maui and other communities impacted by disasters across the country. And we just heard from our majority leader what is happening in New York City, even as we speak. So again, as we speak, the Senate is working to advance a bipartisan continuing resolution to keep government open, which includes $6 billion in disaster relief. While clearly not everything we need, it is a critical down payment that will allow the federal government to continue its important work on Maui and in other communities impacted by disasters across the country. It will allow FEMA, the SBA, and the other critical federal agencies to continue their disaster relief work as we work to pass a longer-term funding agreement. But if radical House Republicans shut down the government, that funding will be held up indefinitely. My colleague, Representative Jill Takuda of Hawaii, summed it up well just yesterday in her testimony before the House Energy and Commerce Committee. She said the people of Maui have gone through enough. The wheels of government must keep turning to provide the support and resources so they focus on recovery and rebuilding, end quote. By forcing a government shutdown, Speaker McCarthy will be abandoning the people of Maui, the very same people he vowed to help just weeks ago when he visited Maui. We are less than 48 hours from Republicans shutting down our government, and they have yet to even put forward a funding bill that they can pass. It's unconscionable. While these remarks are focused on the impact of a shutdown on disaster aid, make no mistake, a Republican government shutdown will have negative consequences for millions of Americans, not just in disaster relief, but on every aspect of their lives all across our country. This is not a game. We all want to know what it's going to take for House Republicans to grow up and realize that the chaos they are sowing is going to have real impacts on real people's lives all across the country. Meanwhile, the Hawaii delegation, as well as the bipartisan Senate, will continue doing everything we can to keep government open by passing the continuing resolution that we have on deck in the Senate and secure the funding for our communities.
Senator Hirono.
Mr. Chairman, congratulations to each of you. I asked the following two foundational questions of nominees to for any of the committees on which I sit. So I'll start with Ms. Hill and go right down the line. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Ms. Hill, you have a long career working for the Cherokee Nation, most recently as Attorney General, so I think that you will bring a unique perspective to the federal bench. How has your experience working for the Cherokee Nation prepared you for an appointment to the federal bench?
One of the good things about working for the Cherokee Nation, one of the things I have most enjoyed was the opportunity to work with lots of different types of people, working with state leaders on issues of common concern, working with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District to prosecute crime in Indian Country. So I've had an opportunity to work with lots of different types of individuals while working for the Cherokee Nation. It is the largest federally recognized Indian tribe and we have a very large reservation. So it's created lots of opportunities for me to learn to work with different people and to learn this state very well and to learn the law of lots of different topics from laying pipelines and fossil fuels right up to criminal jurisdictional matters in Indian Country. So it's given me a breadth of experience that I think is going to be useful to a district judge in the Northern District of Oklahoma.
I agree with you, and if confirmed, you'll be the first Native American woman to serve as a federal judge in Oklahoma. And this committee has had a hearing in which we are, I think, sending to the floor. I hope, yes, we are. The first Native Hawaiian woman to sit on the federal bench. So I think it's very important that we have judges who have the kind of perspective that has to do with our Native people. So, I certainly look forward to supporting you. Again, for you, in McGirt v. Oklahoma, the Supreme Court held that the state of Oklahoma lacked jurisdiction to prosecute Native Americans for crimes committed on tribal land. Can you tell the committee briefly about the process of setting up the Cherokee Nation's criminal division following that Supreme Court decision?
When that case was decided, the Cherokee Nation's criminal docket was pretty uneventful. We typically had about 100 cases a year that we would hear because most of the more serious crimes were tried by the Northern District or the Eastern District. Post-McGirt, that completely changed. The jurisdictional rules applied throughout the reservation. So we had, I think, around 3,700 matters, criminal and traffic matters filed that first year post-McGirt. So I had to go from 1 criminal prosecutor to 9 full-time criminal prosecutors. And that sort of ramping up included support staff, investigators, all of those things that were required. So that process of building that up very quickly was something that I had to oversee as Attorney General, and it was quite the effort. But it was, that's what the law required. The nation's jurisdiction was larger than had previously been understood until the opinion in McGirt v. Oklahoma.
Thank you. Judge Maglona, since 2011, you have served as the sole active federal district court judge in the Northern Mariana Islands, and as such, you perform the work of a chief judge, a magistrate judge, and a bankruptcy judge. You wear many hats. Can you tell us about the unique experience of being not only the chief judge, but also the only federal judge in a district, and how has this experience informed your judicial approach?
Senator, it's been a wonderful challenge to be able to do all 3 areas of law. I'll be candid, the bankruptcy docket is not very vibrant right now. But there were instances where we'd have to do some novel issues. And as I mentioned, I also sit in by designation in Guam. So I assist in that district, and that's where I've also had additional experience even privileging over bankruptcy cases. Given the broad general jurisdiction experience that I had in the trial court for 8 years, I think it really prepared me to be able to do everything from beginning to end as magistrate judges for criminal or civil matters of criminal, from warrants all the way to sentencing as a district judge. So I had that full experience, and I enjoyed the full panoply, and I am so rewarded when I am also work with other district judges from either my neighboring district in Guam or elsewhere, including Hawaii.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And while I didn't have a question for you, Mr. Russell, I look forward to supporting you also.
Thank you, Senator. Senator
Thank
Grassley?
Yeah. Ms. Hill, I'm going to start with you. The 4 years, you were for 4 years until recently Attorney General, as we all know now.
Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, I rise today alarmed at Republicans' demands for drastic anti-immigrant policy changes in exchange for continued support for Ukraine. For nearly 2 years, our allies in Ukraine have fought off Putin's unjust invasion with the support of the United States. Support President Zelensky himself has said is essential to his country's success. But now, as Ukrainians fight to defend their country and democracy itself, Republicans are holding additional aid hostage in exchange for unrelated immigration policy changes. In exchange for one-time funding for Ukraine, Republicans are demanding permanent policy changes that would further weaken our broken immigration system. The proposal put forward by several of my Republican colleagues earlier this month would further complicate our asylum system and sow further chaos at the southern border. This plan would require asylum seekers to apply for asylum in every country through which they transit, a clear violation of international law that would effectively deny asylum to almost anyone outside of Mexico or Canada who cannot fly directly to the United States. Similarly, raising the standard for initial asylum screenings, known as credible fear interviews, would require asylum seekers to present even more detailed asylum claims within just days of a traumatic journey to the United States, typically while detained in DHS custody and without the assistance of counsel. By making it even harder for the most vulnerable to seek asylum, These changes would result in political dissenters and persecuted minorities being sent back to danger and, in some instances, to their deaths. The Republicans' plan would also make the situation at the southern border more chaotic by eliminating the president's parole authority, which the Biden administration has used to create safe, orderly pathways for nationals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to enter the United States. Eliminating this parole authority would force vulnerable people from these countries to make a dangerous journey to our border to seek protection rather than applying for protection in advance. Madam President, as the only immigrant serving currently in the Senate, I know that the challenges confronting immigrants are not hypothetical. This isn't about statistics. It's about people desperate for opportunity and the hope of building a better life in our country. A plan that villainizes and degrades those seeking to enter our country is bad enough. But this plan does little to address the actual issues facing immigrants. Failing to acknowledge the plight of DACA recipients, temporary protective status holders, and undocumented individuals living in the shadows while contributing to our communities and our economy. Just this month, the Judiciary Committee on which I sit held a hearing on how to improve immigration courts. Immigration experts shared meaningful, thoughtful ways to improve this key component of our immigration system. Disappointingly, but not surprisingly, sad to say, none of the solutions discussed at that hearing are included in the Republicans' proposal. Beyond the problematic content of their proposal is the precedent that Republicans are attempting to set by tying one-time funding for Ukraine to permanent anti-immigrant policy changes. Pitting vulnerable groups against each other, Ukrainians fighting an unjust invasion, and asylum seekers fleeing persecution is a recipe for bad policymaking. Exchanging permanent policy changes for temporary funding all but guarantees additional Republican demands on immigration next year. There was a serious effort to enact bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate in 2013. I was here then. I had just gotten elected to the Senate. 2013 was the last time this body attempted to address this issue of a broken immigration system in a comprehensive way. To this day, I consider that bill that we worked on in a bipartisan way in 2013 as one of the most important issues and bills I've ever worked on in the Senate. Comprehensive immigration reform was needed then, and it is desperately needed even more now. I stand ready to work in good faith with anyone looking to meaningfully improve our nation's badly outdated and broken immigration system. However, that is not what the current Republican proposal does. Madam President, the American people are tired of rhetoric. They are looking to us to act. I believe this body has the ability to come together and enact comprehensive immigration reform. And I hope we, Democrats and Republicans, we both acknowledge that the immigration system is broken, can find the will to do so. We did in 2013, and we can do it again. On another note, Madam President, I'm glad that later today, the Senate will vote to confer Micah Smith and tomorrow Shanlin Park as judges on the U.S. District Court for the state of Hawaii. Shanlin Park, who currently serves as a Hawaii Circuit Court judge, was born and raised in Hawaii, where her career has been spent almost entirely in public service. After graduating from Chaminade University and the William S. Richardson School of Law, Judge Park served as a federal public defender in Hawaii for 20 years. As a judge, she has earned high marks for her even-handed approach and well-reasoned, fair decisions. Importantly, if confirmed, Judge Park would make history as the first Native Hawaiian woman to serve as a federal district court judge. It's high time and long overdue. Representation matters. Like Judge Park, Micah Smith has also had an impressive legal career. After graduating from Lock Haven University and Harvard Law School, he clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and then on the Supreme Court for Justice Souter. He went on to become a federal prosecutor, a job he has held for the last 12 years. He began at U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and in 2018 returned home to Hawaii to join the U.S. Attorney's Office in Honolulu. I believe both nominees' experience, temperament, and demonstrated commitment to public service, along with their deep roots in Hawaii, will make them excellent judges on Hawaii's District Court. I look forward to voting to confirm them. And I know that we've already voted on Micah Smith, and I thank my Republican colleagues for voting for Micah in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to their support for Shannon Park. Madam President, I yield the floor. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you all for coming to testify. I know that you all are facing major challenges because private sector is very busy trying to entice people to join up with them, and so you're facing a lot of those kinds of challenges, and I have to assume that you are wanting to attract people from all backgrounds, all racial backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering whether, as we have an awareness of some realities such as the barracks that are uninhabitable and there are these quality of life issues, I am wondering in your recruitment efforts, do your potential recruits ask about things like where do I get to live? What's the quality of life conditions? Do you get those kinds of questions, and are those barriers to people signing up with you all? Any of you? No, it's not a problem?
Yeah. So the questions we get from many of our applicants, two things. Hey, do I have an opportunity to select duty station of choice? That's a big one. And so that's really connected with the current population. In terms of quality of life, we tell our, we train our recruiters, share your story, because quality of life is a huge decision factor in terms of service to the country. And barracks, it has not come up, but from parents that I speak with, ma'am, yes, it does come up. Hey, I want to make sure quality of life is in place, and I will tell you all this is a priority for the Secretary and the Chief of Staff of the Army. They just spoke about that earlier today.
I mean, really, once, let's say that you're successful in recruiting and then they show up at their barracks and it is really bad condition, mold, et cetera. So we do need to improve those elements of service, and that's why there is a pilot program to give military secretaries greater authority to replace substandard barracks and standardized barrack requirements. So that's something that that I've certainly pushed for. Now, you mentioned, you agree, that diversity is important. You need to attract all kinds of people. And I know that, for example, and this is for General Bowers, there was a report that there are only 5 African-American Marine fighter pilots, which is not even 1% of the Marine fighter force. General Bowers, the results of an independent study regarding the lack of diversity in pilots concluded the Marine Corps cannot overcome generations of discrimination and mistrust merely by removing barriers to participation in top-tier jobs, such as fighter pilots. Instead, it must establish new pathways to reach and recruit African Americans and entrust the role of, quote, Chief Diversity Officer, and quote, to the Commandant himself. General Bowers, what's the Marine Corps doing to address these concerns?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. As noted, the Marine Corps is aggressively competing for the best talent in every gender and demographic group in the country. For our officer recruiting mission for fiscal year 2023 just concluded, we had the highest diversity percentage we've ever had. So it is working. Our message is resonating with young men and women of character out there. We will continue to aggressively compete for every market. I think the issue becomes also one of retention and how we retain our best Marines, which is a priority of our Commandant.
Well, that's another issue. So can we look forward to having more than 5 African-American fighter pilots at some point?
Yes, ma'am.
How long do you think that would take?
Ma'am, I'm not the Deputy Commandant for Marine Aviation. I know that we are assessing African-American officers. They're doing well. I can take that one for the record.
We want them to succeed. I'm not talking about fast tracking, but some of these things have to be done in an intentional way. And I would like it to be noted that we pay attention to the kind of opportunities that are created for our people. There's just one more thing, ma'am. Oh, well, is it okay? I just want to, you're going to stop me? If you don't mind. There was a time where single parents could not join without requiring them to resign custody of their children, and I believe that is something that is being changed. Is that limitation being changed in terms of your recruiting?
Yes, ma'am. One of the initiatives that we put in place in FY23 is a single parent waiver that allows a single parent to have up to 2 dependents under the age of 18 but no younger than 1 and join our Navy and continue to serve.
So do the rest of you allow single parents to join?
We have a process whereby they can join, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Same, ma'am.
We do as well, ma'am.
Yeah, I think you also should think about cryopreservation as a way to help, especially women, but men too, in terms of family planning. And it would enable, I think, more of them to contemplate joining because of that option. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Hirono. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for your testimony.